It is important to learn about stereotypes before discussing the terms prejudice, discrimination, and racism that are often used interchangeably in everyday conversation. Stereotypes are oversimplified generalizations about groups of people. Stereotypes can be based on race, ethnicity, age, gender, sexual orientation, almost any characteristic. They may be positive, usually about one's own group, but are often negative, usually toward other groups, such as when members of a dominant racial group suggest that a subordinate racial group is stupid or lazy. In either case, the stereotype is a generalization that doesn't take individual differences into account. Where do stereotypes come from? In fact, new stereotypes are rarely created. Rather, they are recycled from subordinate groups that have assimilated into society and are reused to describe newly subordinate groups. For example, many stereotypes that are currently used to characterize new immigrants were used earlier in American history to characterize Irish and Eastern European immigrants. Prejudice. Prejudice refers to the beliefs, thoughts, feelings, and attitudes someone holds about a group. A prejudice is not based on personal experience. Instead, it is a prejudgment, originating outside actual experience. Recall from the chapter on crime and deviance that the criminalization of marijuana was based on anti-immigrant sentiment. Proponents used fictional, fear-instilling stories of reefer madness and rampant immoral and illegal activities among Spanish-speaking people to justify new laws and harsh treatment of marijuana users. Many people who supported criminalizing marijuana had never met any of the new immigrants who were rumored to use it. The ideas were based in prejudice. While prejudice is based in beliefs outside of experience, experience can lead people to feel that their prejudice is confirmed or justified. This is a type of confirmation bias. For example, if someone is taught to believe that a certain ethnic group has negative attributes, every negative act committed someone in that group can be seen as confirming the prejudice. Even a minor social offense committed by a member of the ethnic group, like crossing the street outside the crosswalk or talking too loudly on a bus, could confirm the prejudice. While prejudice often originates outside experience, it isn't instinctive. Prejudice, as well as the stereotypes that lead to it and the discrimination that stems from it, is most often taught and learned. The teaching arrives in many forms, from direct instruction or indoctrination, to observation and socialization. Movies, books, charismatic speakers, and even a desire to impress others can all support the development of prejudices. Discrimination. While prejudice refers to biased thinking, discrimination consists of actions against a group of people. Discrimination can be based on race, ethnicity, age, religion, health, and other categories. For example, discrimination based on race or ethnicity can take many forms, from unfair housing practices such as redlining to biased hiring systems. Overt discrimination has long been part of U.S. history. In the late 19th century, it was not uncommon for business owners to hang signs that read, "Help wanted, no Irish need apply." And Southern Jim Crow laws, with their "whites only" signs, exemplified overt discrimination that is not tolerated today. Discrimination also manifests in different ways. The scenarios above are examples of individual discrimination, but other types exist. Institutional discrimination occurs when a societal system has developed with embedded disenfranchisement of a group, such as the U.S. military's historical non-acceptance of minority sexualities. The "don't ask, don't tell" policy reflected this norm. While the form and severity of discrimination vary significantly, they are considered forms of oppression. Institutional discrimination can also include the promotion of a group's status, such in the case of privilege, which is the benefits people receive simply by being part of the dominant group. Most people have some level of privilege, whether it has to do with health, ability, race, or gender. When discussing race, the focus is often on white privilege, which is the societal privilege that benefits white people, or those perceived to be white, over non-white people in some societies, including the United States. Most white people are willing to admit that non-white people live with a set of disadvantages due to the color of their skin. But until they gain a good degree of self-awareness, few people are willing to acknowledge the benefits they themselves receive by being a part of the dominant group. Why not? Some may feel it lessens their accomplishments. Others may feel a degree of guilt, and still others may feel that admitting to privilege makes them seem like a bad or mean person. But white, or other dominant, privilege is an institutional condition, not a personal one. It exists whether the person asks for it or not. In fact, a pioneering thinker on the topic, Peggy McIntosh, noted that she didn't recognize privilege because, in fact, it was not based in meanness. Instead, it was an invisible weightless knapsack full of special provisions that she didn't ask for, yet from which she still benefited. McIntosh, 1989. As the reference indicates, McIntosh's first major publication about white privilege was released in 1989. Many people have only become familiar with the term in recent years. Prejudice and discrimination can overlap and intersect in many ways. To illustrate, here are 4 examples of how prejudice and discrimination can occur. Unprejudiced non-discriminators are open-minded, tolerant, and accepting individuals. Unprejudiced discriminators might be those who unthinkingly practice sexism in their workplace by not considering women or gender non-conforming people for certain positions that have traditionally been held by men. Prejudiced non-discriminators are those who hold racist beliefs but don't act on them, such as a racist store owner who serves minority customers. Prejudiced discriminators include those who actively make disparaging remarks about others or who perpetuate hate crimes. Racism. Racism is a stronger type of prejudice and discrimination used to justify inequalities against individuals by maintaining that one racial category is somehow superior or inferior to others. It is a set of practices used by a racial dominant group to maximize advantages for itself by disadvantaging racial minority groups. Such practices have affected wealth gap, employment, housing discrimination, government surveillance, incarceration, drug arrests, immigration arrests, infant mortality and much more. Race Forward 2021. Broadly, individuals belonging to minority groups experience both individual racism and systemic racism during their lifetime. 1. While reading the following some of the common forms of racism, ask yourself, am I a part of this racism? How can I contribute to stop racism? 1. Individual or interpersonal racism refers to prejudice and discrimination executed by individuals consciously and unconsciously that occurs between individuals. 1. Examples include telling a racist joke and believing in the superiority of white people. 2. Systemic racism, also called structural racism or institutional racism, is systems and structures that have procedures or processes that disadvantages racial minority groups. 2. Systemic racism occurs in organizations as discriminatory treatments and unfair policies based on race that result in inequitable outcomes for white people over people of color. 2. For example, a school system where students of color are distributed into underfunded schools and out of the higher-resourced schools. 3. Racial profiling is a type of systemic racism that involves the singling out of racial minorities for differential treatment, usually harsher treatment. 3. The disparate treatment of racial minorities by law enforcement officials is a common example of racial profiling in the United States. 3. For example, a study on the driver's license privilege to all Minnesota residents from 2008 to 2010 found that the percentage of Latinos arrested was disproportionately high. Feist 2013. 3. Similarly, the disproportionate number of black men arrested, charged, and convicted of crimes reflect racial profiling. 4. Historical racism is economic inequality or social disparity caused by past racism. 4. For example, African Americans have had their opportunities in wealth, education and employment adversely affected due to the mistreatment of their ancestors during the slavery and post-slavery period. Wilson 2012. 5. Cultural racism occurs when the assumption of inferiority of one or more races is built into the culture of a society. 5. For example, the European culture is considered supposedly more mature, evolved and rational than other cultures. Blount 1992. 5. A study showed that white and Asian American students with high GPAs experience greater social acceptance while Black and Native American students with high GPAs are rejected by their peers. Fuller Rowell and Doan 2010. 6. Colorism is a form of racism, in which someone believes one type of skin tone is superior or inferior to another within a racial group. 6. For example, If an employer believes a black employee with a darker skin tone is less capable than a black employee with lighter skin tone, that is colorism. 6. Studies suggest that darker-skinned African Americans experience more discrimination than lighter-skinned African Americans. Herring, Keith, and Horton 2004. Klonoff and Landrine 2000. 7. Color avoidance racism, sometimes referred to as colorblind racism, is an avoidance of racial language by European Americans that ignores the fact that racism continues to be an issue. 7. The U.S. cultural narrative that typically focuses on individual racism fails to recognize systemic racism. 7. It has arisen since the post-civil rights era and supports racism while avoiding any reference to race. Bonilla Silva 2015. How to be an anti-racist. Almost all mainstream voices in the United States oppose racism. Despite this, racism is prevalent in several forms. For example, when a newspaper uses people's race to identify individuals accused of a crime, it may enhance stereotypes of a certain minority. Another example of racist practices is racial steering, in which real estate agents direct prospective homeowners toward or away from certain neighborhoods based on their race. Racist attitudes and beliefs are often more insidious and harder to pin down than specific racist practices. They become more complex due to implicit bias, also referred to as unconscious bias, which is the process of associating stereotypes or attitudes towards categories of people without conscious awareness, which can result in unfair actions and decisions that are at odds with one's conscious beliefs about fairness and equality. Asta and Vasquez 2021. For example, in schools we often see honors and gifted classes quickly filled with white students while the majority of Black and Latino students are placed in the lower track classes. As a result, our mind consciously and unconsciously starts to associate Black and Latino students with being less intelligent, less capable. Asta and Vasquez, 2021, argue that placing the student of color into a lower and less rigorous track, we reproduce the inequity and the vicious cycle of structural racism and implicit bias continues. Figure 11.5 Implicit Bias and Structural Racialization. Asta and Vasquez 2021. If everyone becomes anti-racist, breaking the vicious cycle of structural racism and implicit bias may not be far away. To be anti-racist is a radical choice in the face of history, requiring a radical reorientation of our consciousness. Kendi 2019. Proponents of anti-racism indicate that we must work collaboratively within ourselves, our institutions, and our networks to challenge racism at local, national and global levels. The practice of anti-racism is everyone's ongoing work that everyone should pursue at least the following. Carter and Snyder 2020. 1. Understand and own the racist ideas in which we have been socialized and the racist biases that these ideas have created within each of us. 2. Identify racist policies, practices, and procedures and replace them with anti-racist policies, practices, and procedures. Anti-racism need not be confrontational in the sense of engaging in direct arguments with people, feeling terrible about your privilege, or denying your own needs or success. In fact, many people who are a part of a minority acknowledge the need for allies from the dominant group. Meliku 2020. Understanding and owning the racist ideas, and recognizing your own privilege, is a good and brave thing. We cannot erase racism simply by enacting laws to abolish it, because it is embedded in our complex reality that relates to educational, economic, criminal, political, and other social systems. Importantly, everyone can become anti-racist by making conscious choices daily. Being racist or anti-racist is not about who you are. It is about what you do. Carter and Snyder 2020. What does it mean to you to be an anti-racist? How do you see the recent events or protests in your community, country or somewhere else? Are they making any desired changes? Big picture. Racial tensions in the United States. The death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri on August 9, 2014 illustrates racial tensions in the United States as well as the overlap between prejudice, discrimination, and institutional racism. On that day, Brown, a young unarmed black man, was killed by a white police officer named Darren Wilson. During the incident, Wilson directed Brown and his friend to walk on the sidewalk instead of in the street. While eyewitness accounts vary, they agree that an altercation occurred between Wilson and Brown. Wilson's version has him shooting Brown in self-defense after Brown assaulted him, while Dorian Johnson, a friend of Brown also present at the time, claimed that Brown first ran away, then turned with his hands in the air to surrender, after which Wilson shot him repeatedly. Nobles and Bosman 2014. 3 autopsies independently confirmed that Brown was shot 6 times. Lowery and Fears 2014. The shooting focused attention on a number of race-related tensions in the United States. First, members of the predominantly black community viewed Brown's death as the result of a white police officer racially profiling a black man. Nobles and Bosman 2014. In the days after, it was revealed that only 3 members of the town's 53-member police force were black. Nobles and Bosman 2014. The national dialogue shifted during the next few weeks, with some commentators pointing to a nationwide sedimentation of racial inequality and identifying redlining in Ferguson as a cause of the unbalanced racial composition in the community, in local political establishments, and in the police force. Bowie 2014. Redlining is the practice of routinely refusing mortgages for households and businesses located in predominantly minority communities, while sedimentation of racial inequality describes the intergenerational impact of both practical and legalized racism that limits the abilities of black people to accumulate wealth. Ferguson's racial imbalance may explain in part why, even though in 2010 only about 63% of its population was black, in 2013 black people were detained in 86% of stops, 92% of searches, and 93% of arrests. Missouri Attorney General's Office 2014. In addition, de facto segregation in Ferguson's schools, a race-based wealth gap, urban sprawl, and a black unemployment rate 3 times that of the white unemployment rate worsened existing racial tensions in Ferguson while also reflecting nationwide racial inequalities. Bowie 2014. This situation has not much changed in the United States. After Michael Brown, dozens of unarmed black people have been shot and killed by police. Studies find no change to the racial disparity in the use of deadly force by police. Belli 2020. Do you think that racial tension can be reduced by stopping police action against racial minorities? What types of policies and practices are important to reduce racial tension? Who are responsible? Why?